Hello, and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year's packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and just so much more. The 2024 conference brings you this session, The Older Beginning Author. It's never too late for a plot twist. And I am so excited and honored to have been chosen to facilitate this conversation. Let's just jump right in and have our panelists introduce themselves. And let's start with Patchree.
Hello, I'm Patchree Jones. I'm a debut author, middle grade author. You can see Skylight is right here. This is coming out June 25th. It's my first foray into writing. I'm a mom living in Southern California, 2 kids and a husband, 1 lazy dog. I never really set out to become a writer. But when I had my kids, I loved just making up stories with them. And that's kind of what snowballed into writing, specifically why I like writing middle grade versus I tried writing adult stuff. I like writing rom-com. I like watching rom-coms, reading them. It's just not my writing style. Being able to share those stories and introduce those worlds. I have a very Thai-based fantasy. So putting my culture and bringing it in to share it with hopefully kids around the world is kind of just how I jumped into that journey. So that is me.
That's wonderful. Congratulations on your debut coming out soon. Let's move on to KD.
Hi, I'm a author who first got published in his 40s. I do pretty much the work of my lifetime is going to be a 9-book series about a reimagined modern day world with Atlantis in it. And it's all about the story of a prince rebuilding his throne, but it's heavy with themes of urban fantasy, found family, lots of humor, I hope. And because I worked on all 9 books, the outline before I started writing, sort of a very interdependent tale with a lot of Easter eggs and hints along the way.
Wow, 9 books is so impressive. Like I can't even imagine in my head that would get so jumbled up.
Hello, Excel.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to Paulette. Paulette, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Paulette Kennedy, and I write historical Gothic fiction. My first book came out when I was 46 years old, and I am on book number 4 right now. I'm waiting on developmental edits for that one right now. My most recent publication is The Devil and Mrs. Davenport. It's a mid-century Gothic, loosely inspired by Shirley Jackson and her work. And I'm just really happy to be here to talk about this subject because it's one that's near and dear to my heart.
Wow. I'm so impressed with all of your writing credentials. Not intimidated at all. I would never. This is excellent. We have such a great panel. Let's dive right into the questions that we've prepared. Just sharing as much as you're comfortable with. This kind of dovetails off of your introduction. Can you tell us about how your writing journey and your publishing journey, which 2 separate things, have really begun thus far in your life? And let's go right to KD with this one.
I don't even remember a period of my life where I didn't want to be a writer. Not even a little, sneaking soap operas while my mother was watching them and coming up with these elaborate stories in my head and Star Wars figures. And from the beginning, I mean, everything about my life was about writing and creating stories, but the world got in the way. A job got in the way. I need to make a living and figure out what the world was about for me got in the way. So I didn't really read as much as I wanted to do it throughout my youth. It wasn't really until I settled down with a job that took care of the bills and I was able to really think about whether this is something I wanted to do that everything kind of fell into place and materialized. And I happily proceeded to cannibalize a lifetime worth of start and stop novels into one series, which I will just enthusiastically work on for the rest of my life, happily play in this little sandbox I created.
Wow. Yeah, no, life definitely throws monkey wrenches into the plans there. What about you, Patchree?
I I loved stories. I loved reading as a kid. I think I was a pretty prolific reader as a kid. I think in high school I got involved with drama, so I pictured myself as a screenwriter because I was in drama productions all through high school. But it was never really officially in my plan to write anything. It just saw like, I don't know, I didn't see myself in the books that I read as a kid. And so that's maybe kind of what motivated me as when I got older in life. But when I sat down and started writing Skylight I started it in 2017. It was a summer project with my daughter and I. She was 9 at the time. So my character was like 10 at the time. And now she's aged up because my daughter's now 15. So just a span of what it took to be able to write it. When I made up stories for the kids, it was, I had the same like Katie, I had a corporate job. I ran my own business, a consulting firm with my husband, and we did that for almost like 2 decades. And when things settled down, just like pre-COVID, definitely COVID made me finish the book. But my daughter and I started, she wrote a paragraph, I wrote a paragraph. I still have that like draft on my computer, and I just kept going with the story. But the kids really motivated me to be able to want to finish writing, because those characters that were in my head, they've developed more, and they nag at you and they talk to you like in the back of your head. They're like, I need to be told, I need to be told. And so that's something that if you're not, when you say that to people who don't write, they don't always understand how your characters take over your worlds. But I think I really kind of pushed myself to finish it because I wanted to show my kids that even if it takes a really, really long time, no matter what it is, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, I'm 44 and I love telling them that I'm like really old, and they think, and they're like, you don't seem old, mom. Every time we talk about you to their friends, they never think I'm old because I watch all the same cartoons that they do. And I watch all the same stuff to keep myself in touch with middle grade stories. But having that interaction, it made it feel like the writing process is a way for me to stay connected to my kids while they're still kids, because when we get older, they don't want to talk to you. You don't want to get to the point where they don't want to talk to you anymore. But having that project, showing that if you stick with it and you kind of push through, no matter how hard it is, it's something that eventually you can finish. And like the physical books just came yesterday, and we recorded the unboxing video, and the kids are like, oh my God, it's like a real book. So having them be a part of it made the journey more fulfilling for me. And then definitely going small press, I queried forever. I was about to self-publish, and then my publishers were like, if you're going to self-publish it, we'll take it. Because so it's cool to have a team on a small press, to be able to go that traditionally route as we kind of learn this business part of it together. But didn't
That's
really set out for it,
amazing.
and it kind of things just like pieces just kind of fell into place. So that was
What a moment getting to hold your book. Wow. Paulette, let's go and see where you began as a writer.
Well, it all began with reading. I was a prolific reader from a very young age. Before kindergarten, my mom taught me how to read because she was an avid reader as well. And she introduced me to Gothic fiction. And so that's kind of where my love of Gothic came from, was from my mom. And as I got older and in school, my teachers started telling me I had an aptitude for writing and storytelling. I didn't really like think when I was super young that I was going to be a writer, but then once I got into high school and college, I started working on my school's journalism team and such, and working on the school's literary journal. And I wrote a lot of poetry back then. It was the 90s, and I was writing a lot of angsty Gen X poetry as we did. And I just loved writing. It was a good outlet for me creatively. And then once I got in college, I started kind of pursuing what commercial publishing would look like. But I didn't really like finish a full manuscript until I was in my early 40s, and it was during the pandemic. I was a wedding photographer, and I lost all my contracts. We had just moved to Southern California, and I didn't really have a photography clientele built up yet. And so my husband was like, why don't you just like pursue your writing and see what happens? Like, now you've got time. And so I finished the manuscript that I had been working on. I started querying. I wasn't really getting a lot of traction. I took it back and I revised it with the help of a fabulous freelance editor, and queried it again. And I had a pretty good response. And then on a whim, I entered PitMad, which is no longer a thing, on Twitter. Yes. And my pitch went viral, and that was the novel that became Parting the Veil. So within a couple weeks, I had signed with my agent, and then a few weeks after that, I got my offer from my publisher, and that was kind of how I got into publishing. And now I'm like 49, and I love doing this, and I want to do it for the rest of my life. So that's one of the beautiful things about writing. I think pretty much it's something that you can do for the rest of your life, and age isn't really as much of a factor for us as it is with other careers. Definitely my other two careers. I was a hairstylist for 22 years, and then I was a photographer for 10 years. High degree of physicality with both of those jobs, and eventually they would become self-limiting. So I'm really very grateful that I was able to break into the publishing industry.
Oh yeah, thank you, pandemic, right? It gave us so many new voices in the
Right.
publishing space. Did anybody study creative writing in college? I didn't think so. Yeah. Interesting that. Okay. Well, let's move on to our next question. So what are some of the benefits that you felt that being an older author when you got your start has provided you with? Let's start with Paulette this time.
I think one of the biggest benefits is that I am less risk averse. In my older age, I've owned a couple businesses before, and being a writer is pretty much being a small business owner. So that kind of helped set me up. Also, just perspective on life and perspective on a lot of things that I didn't necessarily have in my 20s and 30s. In my 30s, I was, raising my child and building my photography career, and that's a form of storytelling too. So all of those lessons that I learned from my other careers and from being a mom and being married and like going through like difficult things that I went through in my life. And also I grew up very, very poverty stricken. All of that helped inform my writing, and it made me less afraid to write what I knew. Because I think that's a big part of it too. I think sometimes when you're younger, not always, but sometimes you're a little bit less confident about tackling some of those subjects that are deeper and that you haven't quite necessarily worked all the way through. So like in your 40s, you have a little bit less fear about that. So I think that's one of the benefits. And also just you have a little bit more patience, which I think is one of those qualities that's very necessary as an author, to have patience, especially if you're going the traditional route, because querying and submission require a lot of patience. It requires a thick skin, and all of those things I think come a little bit easier with age, not necessarily always. I definitely admire the younger writers who have been able to break in at a young age, and sometimes I wish that I had broken in earlier, but I don't think I was ready yet. And I think that things happened when they were supposed to happen for me.
Yeah, being ready or feeling like you're ready is such an important thing. KD, how about you? What do you think about the benefits have been of being older?
It's not just like me being ready, it's the world being ready too. I'm a queer author, and like when I first, I'd been working with a writing group for years and years, and I had a story, the writing group, the feedback was amazing, and they kept on saying, you got to submit, you got to submit. And when I finally did, I'm glad I waited. It's not just the fact that I have more stability in my life. I have a date. You can't, let's be honest, this is not the publishing world of 30 years ago. The stories of breakout authors who are young, who are earn enough to quit all work and write, that is really rare. You don't get that support nowadays, not unless you're smart and you know hybrid publishing and you can, you know, really brand yourself. But I couldn't have done that when I was young. I wouldn't have known enough, not about the world, not about the publishing industry. Things happened when they should, but in particular, I think two things that really, I'm glad I waited. I don't think I would have been as proud of my early stuff if I published earlier, because number one, the world wasn't ready. I would have, if I was a gay author back in the 80s and 90s, I would have, my stories would have been about AIDS or the coming out process. That's it. There was nothing, there was no middle ground. You didn't have wider stories now. And when I finally published, the world had changed. And we might look at today's, dumpster fire of a news cycle and forget how far we've come in 20 or 30 years. It is astonishing, some things, what they used to be like. And you know, the words we used to use 20 years ago, how harmful they were and how violent they were, a lot of our slogans and our slang. And I'm glad I wrote when I did, because it afforded me the chance to grow up and break some of the models, those problematic authors from my childhood that I can't talk about because I don't want to espouse what, what they're known for now. I can be someone different. Like, I've learned enough to be better. I've learned enough to be more open-minded and diverse in my own writing. I've learned from my readers. So in a way, I might have gotten published if I started earlier, but it would not have been the series I'm writing now. Even with the same characters, I think I would have been, I needed to be where I needed to be, and I needed the world to be where it needed to be.
Wow, that's such an important thing, thinking about like the audience being ready for your work too. Wow. All right. Well, Patchree, what are the benefits that you've noted in your life for being getting started older?
I think I definitely echo what Paulette and Katie have said. It's this idea that if you're not ready to sit down and dedicate the time to your work and to the manuscript, it's not going to be the best that it can be. If I had started, if I think of, and then I have these conversations with my family a lot, and I have like, I try to like, the idea of 20 years ago when my husband and I, we talk about stuff, we're like, that was like 20 years ago. And it like boggles our mind how quickly things go. And if I look at myself and I look at a 20-year-old Patchree, I would not have written anything like this. So I think I'm like KD in that sense. I'm like 20-year-old. I was like, my confidence is really, really high. I think I'm going to be like super mega everything. I was young. I was teaching at the college level in a graduate program at that age. So I had this kind of arrogance to myself that I've humbled over the years. And I think you need to be humble to be able to write. And that comes with age. So like in our 20s, in my 20s and my 30s, we tried a lot of things. We ran our own, my husband and I, we ran our own business. You're talking about like a multi-million-dollar business. So you're trying to like spread everything out. And I think similar to KD, what's interesting is we created restaurants and we worked in the restaurant industry. So we always felt like our restaurants were always ahead of the curve. Where the concepts that we come up, and we still practice today, we still sit there and go, oh, you drive by an empty for lease space and you're like, that must be the writer in me, where it's like, what kind of business would you put there now? And what kind of restaurant would work in this? And you sit and you have to like analyze everything around it. And so it's good practice to keep you up there. But if I didn't have that business experience, if I didn't make the mistakes that we did, if I didn't even get to travel, and like as a college student, I was on a forensics team, speech and debate. So we would travel to different states and you would see different people and you would hear different stories. If I didn't have that breadth of experience behind me, I don't think I can get the same depth to the stories that I have. And then writing for a younger audience, I think of my kids when I write the books. So everything always comes back to my kids. And I think with writing for middle grade and picture book authors, kid lit, we're in a different world where it's almost like, if you don't have kids, how do you write for them? It's like teachers who don't like kids but teach in the elementary school. Like, why did you pick that career? So I think having that diversity of experiences really kind of influences and adds to being an older author. But I think like Paulette, I have the patience, or I have the lack, I know when to be patient and when to not have the patience. Like I queried for over a year with it, and I knew that this story was very niche. And you got the rejections, and you need a tough skin, and it's hard to sit there, and especially if you're sitting with the family that, they don't understand what you're going through. And it's kind of like, why are you sitting here sending these stories out? Or why do you have these, like, I have a critique group and we talk every month, and I love my critique partners, and so they're like in my acknowledgments. But just jumping in and having that connection, being able to be realistic about stuff, I think all of that comes with being older, because a 20-year-old Patchree would not stand for any of it. I'd be like, they're stupid. I don't know what's wrong with them. They need to, this is the story that they need now. But similar, the world wasn't ready for a story like this back, in early 2000. And now it is, right? We're more open and people are being unapologetic about a lot of things. And I think, Katie, like that's where you're kind of saying the time, like the world that you're in has to be ready for that story. So it's not just about you being a more experienced author, it's about your story being ready for the world. So I think I really like that. I guess make that connection.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. It's the world being ready, the audiences being ready, and you having the experience to bring to bear. So those are the benefits. What about any challenges? And we'll go right back to you.
Me.
Yeah.
I think the challenges, it's probably not have, I don't know, sometimes for me it feels like if the same flip side, writing for a younger audience, I might have a sense that I feel a bit out of touch. I'm fortunate because I have my kids are 9, well, not 9, he was 9 a year ago. He just turned 10, so I have kids that are 10 and 15. So they're kind of like right in that cusp of where my target audience is. So I find myself fortunate that I get to ask them, but a lot of times verbiage, being up to date with their slang, things that seem, I don't know if it still hits the same way for kids or they interpret it the same way. I think that's probably one of the harder challenges of being so in tune with the language of that younger audience. Has to be a challenge. If I wrote for an older audience, I tried writing adult stuff and it's not as fun for me. So I think that's why I end up I always say it's my biggest excuse to watch cartoons. It's my biggest excuse to watch, like, read kid books and stuff. And it's like I'm trying to get a feel for the voice because it's really, I think that has to be you're teetering on a line of being condescending to the kids. But I, at least on the flip side, I guess I'm fortunate that my kids, they're big smarty pants. So they're always talking back, but I like that about them because I want them to be able to do that out in the world when the timing is right. But just feeling a bit, I think the biggest challenge, at least for me writing kid lit, is feeling out of touch. Being older, that I might feel a bit out of touch with what things are. So I end up doing more research, which isn't a bad thing. But having to research what that is. And I don't, I'm, I think, I don't think of, I don't try to look at the age as being a hindrance to it, but I think maybe just finding the avenues that are available to you might be more challenging.
So maybe trying to stay young at heart so you can
Yeah.
connect with your audience.
Like I feel silly applying for mentorships because it's like the mentors are going to be younger than you. Like I
Yeah.
was fortunate, I got George Reg blurbed the book. But when I hear like I interviewed him last year, and to hear him, he's like in his 20s. And so, I'm in my 20s and I'm going out, and then it's like it feels like no different than you watch sitcoms that have the older, the retiree, the middle-aged person going back to work at McDonald's or whatever, and your manager's like an 18-year-old high schooler. So I think it's like so you feel a bit I felt apprehensive really reaching out into the community because I assumed that nobody's in my situation. But that's what happens when you assume is, we hear that saying, if I assume that people aren't in that situation and I don't step out or break out and maybe reach out to see it, then I'm not going to realize it. But knowing, like, when I think of mentorships, I'm not going to apply for them because I don't feel like they fit. And then because it's not that I'm not wholeheartedly delving in, I am now. I'm all in now. When I was starting, I wasn't 100% certain whether or not this was going to work out. And when I do it's just like maybe that's from being in business. The challenge is you try not to get your hopes up too much, which is so pessimistic of me. But that
realistic,
must be a
though.
challenge. It's realistic. And sometimes that realism comes with being older, and that might be challenging because I will self-censor. I'm going to self-reject. I'm going to not put myself out there so much because I'm thinking of all the ramifications of what it's going to be. It's like, oh, you got kids now, they're 2 years from college, you have time to sit there and tinker on the computer. So it kind of feels, it's a double-edged sword where that must be a challenge as well, where you're kind of, it feels like the younger people who are getting those, rare superstar stories, or who are getting the bigger press and they're signing these big, huge deals. It's just knowing that, well, I can't always compare myself to them. And sometimes it's easy to say it, but it's really difficult to feel it.
So as
I
an
can be
older
happy for them,
debut author, you maybe felt a little out of step
out of
with the
step with.
other debut authors.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah, I see. KD, did you find that? I think you mentioned you were what, 44 when your debut came out?
Thereabouts, early 40s. I
Oh,
don't
okay.
know. I honestly, I don't even, I guess maybe it's what I write and what I've gone to, but for the most part, I don't, never felt old. I mean, I've not, certainly never felt like, if anything, I felt like people were mostly my age.
Mhm.
I mean, for me, the drawbacks are, well, number one, just age. I mean, it really, let's be honest, once you hit a certain point, your body starts working against you. It doesn't matter how good shape you're in or how bad shape you're in, parts of your body start falling apart. And you need a lot more time to recharge, and you've got to be more patient with yourself and learn when to recharge. And that's tough because I'm busier than I've been at any other point in my life between a really busy day job. The book writing is going incredibly well. And I picked up a third creative job, which I can't talk about, but it like I'm so busy that I've never been this busy in my life. And meanwhile, my body is saying, my brain is saying you're not moving fast enough, move faster, write quicker, you're behind the ball. You started when you're
Mm.
40. So I'm in my 50s now, and early 50s, and I'm coming to peace with that. And for me, the pandemic was a game changer in many ways. I became stay at home during my day, so I work remote, and all of a sudden, an hour's lunch is actually an hour's lunch again. And
Ah.
something like that it helped my writing, but at the same point, something about the pandemic destroyed my focus. It just
Mm.
absolutely did. It devastated it. I haven't recovered yet. And I'm still not sure why. And I don't know if that's age related or just once you get older, when big things shake up your life, they are a lot harder to deal with because you have more life and it affects more things around you, and recovering from it is is a challenge. But for me, I mean, it hasn't, like I said, the balance is firmly in my favor in this rather than against it. But you do have to, as you get older, start taking more care about you will pay for this later if you don't slow down today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So a question I had specifically for you, since you have such like a wide-ranging fantasy series, do you find that your memory, your ability to remember all the characters and plot points has suffered? Is that more of a
Oh,
challenge now?
that's not the crazy thing. The crazy thing is the stuff I cut. The stuff that I cut that I still think in my head is canon.
Mhm.
I'm rereading I just started a Patreon about 6 weeks ago, and for one of the tiers, all the tiers actually, I'm rereading my books that I haven't done that in a couple of years now, and noticing stuff like, oh crap, is that gold and not silver? Where are the inconsistencies? But I'm really fortunate that I get a lot of very engaged readers. I mean, just
Mm.
they're the best readers in the world. And a lot of them have become friends and some have become colleagues. They work with me on my writing. And two of them are archivists, I call. And their job is like every now and then I hit something and I'm like, I know there was elevator book in book one. What was the elevator music? And they help me hunt it down. And it's kind of fun for them and fun for me. And I don't know what I would do without that and my Excel sheet. My Excel sheet at this point is over 400,000 words for a 9-book series, and I can't, like, I don't know what I would do without it. I mean, when I started writing book
Wow.
four, I've been working on my outline for over 10 years. So when I started
Ah.
book four, I've been working on it for years and years, and the brainstorming outline was 85,000 words for a book which cannot be more than about 120,000 words. That alone was a challenge, just figuring out how I take so much material and slice it away and figure out what I'm left with. But I couldn't, Excel is everything for me. When I have an idea, it goes down. Every novel I have planned is so individual. I know that I can slot an idea somewhere, even if I don't come back to it for a couple of years. I don't know how any other series author gets away with not taking, but for me, that's just my lifeline.
Well, that sounds like a great resource, though.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Paulette, what have the challenges been for you?
Well, I kind of wanted to speak something maybe a little bit different. Like one of the biggest challenges for me, not anymore, but like the past 2 years, is being part of the sandwich generation. being at that age where you still have children at home, some of us do anyway, and then elderly parents who are falling sick and sometimes terminally ill. And that happened to me with my mother a couple years ago. And just finding time to write when all of those things are happening, those external things are happening that affect your ability to concentrate, your time. I was pulled in so many different directions at the end of 2021 and during 2022 that I don't know how I finished 2 books in that time frame, but somehow I did. And I think, and you know, like with what Katie said about the pandemic, it really did a number on my concentration and ability to focus too. And come to find out in my 40s, I'm realizing I'm ADHD. And that came about whenever my child got diagnosed. And I'm like, oh, well, this had to come from somewhere. And this all makes a lot of sense. And I think that the pandemic really exacerbated some of that. And just having COVID too, I really think there are some factors there that maybe they're discovering more about all the time with memory and such. But really, a lot of external factors start happening when you get older, as well as those internal physical things that begin to happen. But life gets really, really hard, I feel like, for a lot of people in their 40s and 50s, just because we're trying to balance so many different things at once. And for me, that was the biggest challenge recently, was just dealing with having an elderly parent and dealing with a child still at home and being 1,700 miles apart from my family for a period of time was really, really difficult. So, and it took a toll on my writing, but I'm still glad that I had that experience. And I think it gave me a lot of empathy. And it also helped me with getting older as well, with realizing that, you know, who we are inside. When you say that you still feel young, Patchree, it's like, it's that we are still the same person inside. Like our bodies may start to fail us, but like who we are as a person, like that continues on all throughout life. And you can use that to enrich your writing.
Yeah, definitely external factors, internal factors. There are a lot of challenges. I feel like young writers, they have that fearlessness of youth, and we've learned better. And so I guess what I'm thinking about is when you're older, you have more assets, more to lose by taking those big risks. But then also you feel less beholden to other people's expectations. And so then in a different way, you feel more free to take risks, which is a weird dichotomy. So I have another question, and I think this one might be my favorite one in the list of questions. What, in your opinion, is the most important thing an aspiring older author should know as they get started with writing or publishing? Let's go right back with Paulette on this one.
Well, I think one of the harder things, or one of the most important things to know, is that you will need to take advice from younger people sometimes, because a lot of people in the publishing industry are younger than us. And as what Patchree was talking about, being young and like having that like confidence and all of that, like where you're kind of cocky about things, like that does definitely get better as you get older. Like nobody could tell me anything about my writing whenever I was 19, 20 years old. Like I already knew it all. It took my first really hard critique for me to realize that no, I didn't really know it all. But I think just being open and being honest with listening to advice and listening to your mentors, even if they're 30, you know, and you're in your 40s or 50s, I think that's important, and it's humbling. And it is good to stay humble. And just being able to have that patience that we were talking about, because it can start to feel like the stakes are higher the older that we get, because we're starting to look at our mortality a little bit more whenever we get into middle age and older. But it's still important to have patience with your work and with editing and revision, and doing all the things that you need to do, because if you try to rush, you're going to end up putting yourself behind. So it's good to just slow down a little bit and to really think about your strategy, and what you want to accomplish with your work, and what you want to say. And I think just reading widely, listening to people who you share your work with, and just being an open to lots of different things, but especially to being open to feedback and criticism from your peers is really, really important, and especially from your publishing team.
They do know things, important things that you should know too. I think you touched on something really important, which is like setting goals for yourself and not just going into it being like, I guess I'll publish a book now. Like, what's your goal with that? I think, KD, you actually touched on that briefly early on in the discussion too, about what your goals were.
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you, Paula, your answer was so good. I almost don't even know how to follow up on it. I mean, you got to learn how to be a student again. And being a student, it's not, we think about being a student and being young period of our life, and we kind of conflate what it's like to be young. But being a student of any age is awkward and insecure, and you don't know things, but you think you do, and you say things, and you're going to sound stupid. And you've just got to be willing to go through that phase again as an older author. And try to set your arrogance aside, because that's the one thing I notice a lot of, is this arrogance of, I've lived through this, I know how to do things, or I've done the research, I know what the market wants. Drives me nuts when I hear that. Do not research the market if you want to be a writer. Do not research what's selling in a given moment, because it will change 5 minutes from now. But if I had to give advice, the number one advice would be, you don't have to throw money at this. It's like a problem. Join a writing group. Find a local writing group. Create a local writing group if one doesn't exist. Understand there are different formats for different writers group. The first might not be something that's good, and it might completely turn you off. There are other models out there. I know that for a fact. But once you actually find a group of people who you like, who you can share your work with, and they share your work with you, you will get the advice of good feedback on your work, and you will learn how to give advice on someone else's work and become a better writer. It's like the snake that eats its own tail. It makes you a better and stronger writer. It makes the person you're writing with a better and stronger writer. And there's so much value in that. And very often it doesn't cost a cent. All it takes is your time, like Paulette said. That's hard when you're in your 40s and you're thinking, I want to do a 9-book series. And me thinking, well, great, I'm going to be 87 when I finish this at the pace I'm currently writing, which I hope is not true. But you've got to be patient. You've got to be fair with yourself. You got to be open-minded about what you're walking into. And no one in their later years wants to go back to feeling insecure again, but that's what it's like to start something.
Yeah, you got to get outside of your comfort zone to achieve things a lot of times, for sure. Patchree, what do you think? I believe I'm saying this incorrectly every time. I'm saying your name differently and incorrectly. Patchree. I nailed it, finally. My apologies. So what are the, challenges, or what advice would you give to an older aspiring debut author?
I think I'm going to piggyback off of what Katie said. And when you think of it like going back to school, you always assume that you have to do what you did when you were 20, right? And then I think back of being 20. I was in my master's program at 21, so I'm in the classroom. I always wanted to teach, and I was sitting there. But I think of, my sister had a boyfriend at the time who spent like, I don't know, 8 years of his life doing chemical engineering, and he hated it by the time he got his PhD. And so you always assume that you're stuck with what that is in your 20s. So whatever I decided in my 20s and my 30s, I'm supposed to be stuck with it. And that's not always true. You can decide to change your career. It's maybe scary. It may be difficult to do that when you're 40. But I had that. Like I went back and I got my master's degree at 42, like 2 years ago. I did a 1-year online master's degree because I said I wanted to be a vet. It was a childhood dream to be a vet. So I went and I did a Master of Science program, and I took a year, and I figured I was probably older than everybody in the class. And this idea that you're always seeing on Twitter, it's like, am I too old to ... And the answer is just always no, you're not. If you feel like you can do it, just do it, right? Sit there and take the class, sit in the class and be okay with being a 40-year-old sitting in a class with 20, 30s who are going to go on to big, fantastic things. And it's like, I'm still going to be proud of whatever that accomplishment I'm getting. And I think part of it, the most inspirational event, or what I would tell to aspiring authors, is of whatever age you are, be happy with those small victories, right? Be happy with the request for fulls, right? Be happy when you get a like on your pitches for whatever it is. Be happy when you get a good critique group, because I definitely ran through a bunch of critique partners before I've settled on my core group now. And they really become the voices in your head. I know that, like, my critique, one of my partners, she's like, when she's writing, she sits and she goes, what is Patchree going to say when she reads this? Right. And so it informs your writing. And then I think it's like, if you find the right support group, and tell yourself that you're never too old to start something new, you're going to be fine. But if you stay grounded and stick to your guns and do what you want to do with it, then you're never too old to start whatever it is. So every time we see those questions, I see those questions like, I'm going to be 50. Should I start this degree program? Yes, go ahead. If you can sit there and do it, you want to be a lawyer, go do it. You want to be a doctor, go do it. Even if you don't end up crossing that finish line. So it's like, I finished the program, but I'm not going into vet school because I realized realistically in a year, it's like, I don't want to spend 8 years in medical school. I don't want to sit there and do this. So there are other avenues, but I didn't lose. It wasn't a loss because I can use that knowledge somewhere else. I didn't lose anything in getting that program, and finishing those master's degrees. So when you sit there, like, and afterwards I finished my master's in communication. So this idea that just because you're older, that the doors are now closed to you, you're the one really closing the door for yourself. So it's never too late to start whatever that career is. Of course, you have to be practical and you have to be grounded and realistic, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't start it or give it a try just because you're older.
Yeah, definitely. Like, don't self-limit. And you never know what you can do until you try. And if you
Exactly.
try and fail, you've learned
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I think KD has touched on his massive spreadsheet that I'm very jealous of, actually. So that's a tool that's helped you. Does anyone else have any other tools or resources that you would recommend to people? And let's start with KD.
I was well, up until I actually had the moment where I said, okay, I'm going to send my stuff out to an agent. And then everything happened really quickly. I was really lucky. But up until that point, everything was handwritten. And I had a stack of journals that went up, I mean, from my feet, at least up to my waist, over the years. And the problem is
Wow.
that I'm lazy and none of that's translated. It's all in the journal. But I finally realized that that's just not an effective use of my time to write something by hand and then never either have to, every time I wrote a novel, I would have to go through all 20 journals to pull details out from this book I'm working on. And now I'm more digital. I use technology. Voice to text is really important for me. My nephew lives with me and he does my audio transcription. He listens to my audio files and he types it out for me into my Excel sheet. He gets some money from it too. And he knows me, we have a good working relationship. That's been amazing. The Trying to think of anything else that's been really useful. I wish I was better at building database files for a series, being able to create your own like wiki using MS Access or Tableau or something like that would be, if you really are able to do that, not only could you store the data, but you could come up with interesting ways of exporting the data easily, like immediately key tagging like chapters, books 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be, jokes, character details, future scenes, whatever it might be. Trying to think if there's any
Airtable might be one that you could look at.
good one. That's right. Um, I think that's I think that's about it. I'm actually looking forward to technology getting to the next level where I can pull out my phone and speak in, like I'll dictate an email to myself, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
That email is usually voice to text on emails is amazing. It actually even captures your weird world building terms in some cases or learns from it. But I'm looking for technology to go more and more in that direction, so I can do more things on myself without relying on others, but still have some final product to show for it.
Like more
I'm really anxious to hear
accessibility
the other examples
tools.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, accessibility tools are really coming into their own, I feel like, for a lot of people. And that might be a big help as we're all aging and our eyesight's not what it used to be, or if you have any kind of dexterity issues and typing becomes a problem. What about Paulette? Any tools that you would advise everyone to use?
Well, I use my phone for a lot of things. I live and die by my notes app. I have like a running to-do list on my notes app, and it really helps me stay organized. And I put everything on that, like from really, really minor small things, like remember to call and make a doctor's appointment at this time. Like things like that really help. And also just writing on my phone, like if I'm out somewhere, or like if I'm doing something and I don't have time to sit down at my laptop and actually write, if I get like a sentence idea or something like that, I'll just open up my notes app on my phone. It's been really helpful, and you can also use voice with that as well. I still do have journals, but I have like small journals that I keep close to me, and I usually keep them close whenever I'm doing my research, because that's when I tend to use them the most. I either use them to write down like little things I want to add into my work in progress, when I run across like an interesting little tidbit, because I write historical fiction. So I'm always like researching. And then when I get I'll get new story ideas sometimes too with that. And so having a notebook or having your phone close by to where you can do like a quick voice text or quick voice application open to write down your ideas or transcribe anything that you want to use, because you can upload that to your laptop later and like have it go right into your document. So using technology that way has really been a beneficial thing to me. I, of course, used to write longhand back in the 90s and early 2000s. And I still remember my first word processor whenever I was in college. We didn't even have computers really, but it is pretty amazing how far technology has come, and there are a lot of things that writers can use that they can benefit from.
Yeah, you had mentioned one of your major challenges is just fitting in the time to write. So that makes so much sense that you were like just having a small mobile device that's with me wherever I'm at, that I can just do something in those little moments in between tasks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember, and you were saying like being able to sync things across devices like the cloud. That's been pretty revolutionary, because I remember having to email myself attachments just to get them from like my work computer to my home computer so I could continue working on them. What a mess, right?
Yeah.
Patchree, what about you? Any tools that you would recommend to people?
I think I'm going to just kind of echo what's already been said. I definitely love the cloud. Like I know people like to use different like Scrivener. I've seen it. I don't want to have to pay for anything, so I don't know if that's a paid program. But even using relying on the cloud, I write everything in Google Docs because I've lost so many drafts before. Oh, but like I've had computers break on me and I've lost chapters, and I sit there and I go, oh my God, what is that? How am I going to get it? So relying on the cloud is definitely helpful. The talk to text programs, I think I recall sitting in a panel or watching a talk with someone who had the dexterity issues. She's a writer as well, and she transcribes and records all of her chapters. Even I think of just knowing the amount of online web-based programs that are out there that can help you do those things to keep you on the go is definitely something. The sight issues, being able to work on the computer and make the fonts as big as you need them for your visual impaired people. I know that like my husband, when I work on my phone a lot too, so I love the notes app. I've got like tons and tons of notes. I write little snippets everywhere on the phone, and then a physical notebook because I used to handwrite things, and then it felt like a waste of time to transcribe stuff over. You're like, what was I writing? The sentence doesn't even make any sense. So if you have those audio, I know that there are a lot of those programs and those tools out there, but my biggest lifesaver has definitely been using the clouds. I used Google Cloud, so as much, as you're paying Google, whatever you're doing, that I would email things to myself. I'd email drafts to myself. I email drafts to like my kids. I email to my husband. I'm like, okay, I need this chapter, or I have whatever it is. So looking at that, I like that. It's almost like a self-built-in archive system, but relying on the cloud, using those talk to text transcribers and the visual tools that are available. And I think really just being able to embrace technology and do a quick search on whatever it is their problem is. There's going to be an app or a site that can help you do that. Like Katie, if you're talking about building those databases and building those websites, I tried to do a wiki once and I was like, I don't understand any of this. I'm like, I don't understand. It's like, and then it's like you type in the what you see is what you get, and it's like a big weird acronym. Like, what the heck does this mean? And I got to sit and ask my kids, like, what does this mean? So trying to find those programs, embracing technology as much as you're comfortable, but knowing, yeah, you don't have to really sit there and say, I'm going to type for 20 minutes, I'm going to type for an hour at a time. Finding those moments and embracing the programs that can allow you to sync your work across is kind of echoing what much of the other panelists have said.
Losing work is the worst. It's just, it's no fun. No one likes it. Let's all never lose work again. Anyone out there listening, go back up your work right now.
And it's different from editing and cutting words, because you eventually have to cut your work down. Like the first draft of this Scarlett was 103,000 words, and that's way too much for middle grade. So it now sits at like 65,000. Having to cut half of that, that's like different than losing all the words that you just wrote.
Yeah, totally different. And do you guys ever find that version control becomes like very confusing and difficult, and you open up a document and you start writing in it and then you're like, this was the wrong file?
Yes.
Been there.
I feel that with the editors. I feel that when I'm emailing things back and forth with my editors and doing revisions, it's like, did they get this message already? Did I make this correction? Is that sentence still the right way? So making sure that we're all working on the same version is important.
Yeah, and that's a thing that technology can help with, but not always perfectly solve that problem. Okay, well, we are to our final question, and this one is really fun because while I have been admiring all of you guys, I think you guys have been really inspirational for me, and I am putting all of your books on my massive TBR list. Who is it that you guys admire who maybe got their start in publishing a little bit later? Who wants to start? No, I'll pick. Well, let's start with KD.
You did the research on various writers who, when they published it, I did not know that Mark Twain, I did not know was much older than I was when I got published, and I thought that was pretty heartening because he still got out a fairly decent library of material. So I'm always worried that I started so late I'll never finish what I need to do, but I'm like, well, he certainly did. He got enough out, so that was inspirational for me. But I don't know. I think I'm kind of like I'm trying to think if there's anyone else I've known who got a later start in life, but I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on that question. Usually, I don't know if I've ever drawn a blank on a panel question before, and I'm just sitting here going, "Dang, I do not know a good answer on that one." So I think I'm just going to stay with Mark Twain. Thank you, Mark Twain.
Yeah, we always have that mental image of Mark Twain as being like the white-haired old man. And I don't know if it ever occurred to anyone else to think like, well, what might he have been like when he got started? Well, he got started super late. So I guess he was always kind of the distinguished gentleman of literature, which is like really interesting to think. He was 41, which for his time was pretty old, and he wrote how many books? I mean, dozens, right? So
Earned his place.
yeah, definitely. Well, let's see. Paulette, do you have an older debut author like idol?
I do. A recent author who got her start later is Bonnie Garmus, Lessons in Chemistry. She was 66 when that book came out, and that was her debut. As she said, she was a copywriter for many, many years before she became a fiction author. But I thought the story behind how she came up with Lessons in Chemistry and what inspired her to write it was pretty great. And it's something that I can definitely relate to as a woman. She had given a presentation to all of her male colleagues that they had just summarily dismissed. And they talked over her and stuff. And she was very angry. And so she went back to her desk at her corporate job and started writing that book. And it became obviously a huge bestseller. But I think her story is really inspirational, and she apparently just quit her day job just a few months ago. So yeah, so I like that story. I think she's very inspirational, and I can't wait to see what she does next.
I did not know that. That's fascinating. I bet she is feeling so validated right now with all the success that her work is having. Good for
Yes,
her.
I hope. Yes, because it's phenomenal.
Wow. Patchree, who's your older debut author idol?
This one, like, I had to research it. So then I did it backwards, and I looked at the book series that I liked and that felt very inspirational, and series that I just loved. So I love the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Kaufman. So I looked up how old is she and how old was she when she published it? She was 43. So that one, I think it's a six or seven book series. But like every time I get a chance, I'm always plugging the Invisible Library series. I love Christina Soonthorn-Batt's books. She did the last map maker, A Wish in the Dark, and then she has a new Guardian series. So she's a Thai author. She was 39 when she published her first book. And then the other one is the Outlander series. So Diana Gabaldon. She was 39. Okay, we're kind of, that's real. But that was like a first big series. And so then like my last inspirational one was Hayao Miyazaki started Studio Ghibli when he was 44. A fun fact, even though he was in the industry in his 20s, he worked at all those different ones. And so we best know him now, of course, for all the Ghibli films. And he was 44. So like those are really a good core for me of it's like, oh wow. So I'm right in that. I'm not out of the age range, and there are a lot of other. I'm keeping good company with people who are older debuts.
It feels comforting to
It
know
does.
that so many of the works that we admire
Yeah.
came from the minds of people who are our age.
Wait, wasn't
Definitely.
Frank McCourt was on the list too? I'm changing
Yes,
my answer
Frank
to Frank
McCourt.
McCourt. He was like 68, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm changing my answer to Frank McCourt. That was a good one because that was probably one of the more amazing novels I've ever read. And it goes to show you, you know, you're never too late to do something like this because you spent your life writing a story in your head. You might not know it, but you have. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I
Because
can't
I think
imagine
of
Zasha's. So,
like I think of when I think of Miyazaki, my favorite Ghibli film is Howl's Moving Castle. So Howl's, I look and I read the book that Diana Wynne Jones wrote. So that one, granted, she was in her 30s when she got published, but she wrote that one when she was in her 50s. So, or it was published in her 50s. So I'm like, I guess that kind of counts, but it's interesting when you really look at it and it's like, if I track it, I don't we know that publishing moves at such a slow pace, so who knows how old you actually were when you're writing it. But that's definitely a fun one.
Wow. I I think this has been such an inspiring conversation and such an important conversation because, not that the lists are important in the grand scheme of things, but there are so many like 30 under 30 lists and 40 under 40, or, we put a lot of emphasis on younger people and younger people's success. And we see like Silicon Valley has an outsized influence on North American culture. And they really idolize younger people and the mythology behind like these younger 20s founders of companies and stuff. And I feel like not enough people are paying attention to and discussing in public facing conversations the achievements of older people who have been established in life. So I'm really happy that we got a chance to pick up that baton and run it a little bit further today. And I appreciate everybody joining me. Does anyone have anything they wanted to add to the conversation? You want to just plug your books real quickly?
Anybody want to start? Yeah, no, I've also, I must definitely echo your opinions. I've enjoyed this conversation, and it's this idea that I think it's an interesting take how you say you have the 20 under 20s, the 30 under 30s, and then it's almost this idea that when you're in your 40s, you should have already been successful. And that's not something that you have to believe, right? You could have been 20. It's like, just because I may have been or was not successful in my 20s or 30s doesn't mean that the game is over for me. So it's good that, when you see older debuts, I think it's putting us in a perspective where you've almost chosen it as a second career for the latter half of your life. But it's like, just because I'm there and I've crossed this line, it doesn't mean I'm done. So I definitely feel like that's important for us to remember as older debut authors and on people going in, you can work all these years, all these decades in something entirely different and decide one day I'm going to do something new, and that's okay. And it's great. And you need to get that story out there so that others who are in the same age or even the younger generation, they don't feel disappointed with not making it big when you're 22 or when you're 32. And it's okay, right? You still have time to change whatever it is and pivot to something entirely new that makes you happy and will make others happy. But definitely I've enjoyed it. And hopefully, like, I put that in the skylight. One day I'll sit and I'll start a blog, maybe write all of these things down. But people can always find me. I'm usually on Twitter, X. You can find me there at Points Tangent. I have a website, Patchree Jones. I'm Patchree Jones at all the other socials. But Skylight is there, and it'll be coming out June 25th. So I'm excited.
Next
2 months.
month.
And
Wow.
yeah, by the time this airs, it'll, just be a few weeks, and it'll be really exciting.
That is really exciting. What about you, KD? Any final shots?
No, I mean, the mantra, you're never too old. Just be humble, be curious, and be patient. It's worth it too. It's worth it too because it's a shot of youth in your arm when you do stuff like this. When you chase your dreams, it reminds us all of better times when the world was dreams ahead of us. So go ahead and do it. But you can find me, if people are looking for me, you can find me on KD_Edwards_NC on Twitter. I hate saying X.
You don't have to. We know what you mean.
kd-edwards.com for my website. And for now, I am hard at work trying to overcome the debilitating effect of the pandemic to finish my 4th novel and to launch into my 2nd trilogy of the 9-book series.
Wow, you've got this. I believe. Also, be humble, be patient, be curious needs to be on a cross stitch. Like, that just needs to happen because that was iconic. Paulette, what do you got going on? Where can we find you?
So you can find me at PauletteKennedy.com. That's my website. I have a newsletter that I put out every month that people seem to enjoy. And you can find me on Threads and Instagram at pkennedywrites. And I just wanted to echo what Patchree says. I have a 20-year-old who's in college, and I think me doing my dream job now is a huge inspiration and also helps younger people not feel like they have to have everything figured out, you know, when you're 20 years old. And I think that that's a really important lesson too. And I hope that younger people who are watching this will understand that they can reinvent themselves at any time. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us. And if you guys wanted to check out a little bit more on this topic, in 2023, WriteHive had when and how to go wide was a topic that they had a panel on, which I think would dovetail really nicely with this topic. And in 2021, they had creating an author brand, which was a lot of the same discussion about how developing your identity with your writing is helpful. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude. And I want to thank you all one final time for joining me here today. Thank you.
Thank you.